Swazi Bajabulile Tshabalala. Ma'am, thank you for your time.
Thank you
welcome.
very much. Thank you for having me.
I imagine you have been busy. I imagine you have been doing a lot of talking. And because of that, and because we are in that final run-in, I wanted perhaps to step back and say, by the way, what message are you taking to the shareholders to say, the right candidate?
So my message is really based on where Africa needs to go today. I was watching an interview, where the CEO of Standard Bank was talking about this is Africa's century. And it is important that we underpin our efforts towards that dream of this being Africa's century on reality. Because the fact of the matter is that, as far as I'm concerned, there are some foundational things that still need to be put in place. The bank was created for exactly that purpose. And I think that it's 60 years old now. It celebrated its 60th anniversary in 2024. And, I think it's time that we go back, not entirely back, but back to why it was created. And it was really created to build infrastructure on the continent. So I'm calling my strategy Lift Africa.
Okay.
And the LI is really for large integrated infrastructure, because it's not just infrastructure, but it's also integrated infrastructure, which is really important, because if we are to take advantage of the Africa continental free trade area, that we have to have integrated infrastructure. And then the F is really a recognition of the reality that traditional donors for Africa's development, that money has been shrinking over, more than, the last 15 years. And we really need to think differently about how we fund development. So this is really about financial innovation, but also the private sector, and really focusing on how we bring in the private sector as funders, as technical partners, but also how we can leverage that effort to also grow private sector in the continent. And then the final letter in Lift is T, and this is really about transforming the bank's operations internally so that we are actually worthy partners of the private sector. I mean, I think that everybody talks about, we have to partner with the private sector. The private sector has very specific requirements, and certainly efficiency is right at the top of their agenda.
I want to follow up on the last point you make around transforming the organization, and we'll come back and talk about the other two important letters that you mentioned in the integration as well as the financing side of it. When you say transforming, what are you suggesting? Is this a reorganization of the bank in terms of how it's conducted its operations? Because I do know that the private sector component has been present, I think, since 2012.
Yeah. So it's really, I think that's an important question, as well, because I am not suggesting a whole-scale reorganizing of the organization, because that would suggest that I'm suggesting a rejection of the 10-year strategy, which I am not.
Which you were part of.
I was part of developing that 10-year strategy. It remains relevant and it remains correct. It remains aligned with Africa's Agenda 2063, and it remains aligned with the SDGs. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to that. However, what I'm doing with Lift Africa is to operationalize the strategy in a way that it actually achieves what we need to achieve, which is really increasing Africa's productivity. People talk about, the African Development Bank can create jobs. We're a bank. Just like any other bank, we don't own, assets in the sense that, we don't own businesses where we hire people. We finance African businesses, we finance African countries in order to create the environment that allows for private sector to thrive. Now, in order for, so the reorganization I'm talking about is really about, pivoting a little bit from just lines of credit, for instance, for financial institutions, to saying how do we partner more deeply, on a long-term development of the infrastructure, whether it's digital, infrastructure, digital connectivity, or it's roads, that will then help to actually drive Africa's productivity, which is what creates new businesses, what creates jobs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think it is important to reflect that. I mean, the AfDB having celebrated its 60th birthday, it's been around since the 1960s, as Gottfried said. It's never had a female president. Yeah. In my view, according to my understanding, correct. And you can correct me there. Correct. And I suppose it's about this new chapter that you potentially bring and the timing in which this new chapter could potentially begin. Maybe you can just talk to us a little bit about that and what you think a turning of a page in terms of the leadership gender characteristics or trait potentially could mean for the vision of the bank. Yeah.
I mean, I think that, in addition to everything else and the attributes I bring, to the job, I think I will bring a unique perspective, one that firmly believes that it's not possible to have a sustainable development of the continent without a very significant role for women. This is at the heart of, what I believe, whether you're looking within the organization or you're looking without. So when we talk about private sector, women have to be at the center of that. It cannot be that, the sort of focus or the assumption, that women cannot lead when it comes to private sector development remains embedded in how we approach, development on the continent. So I think that I think times are changing. Everybody can feel it. Everyone can, see it. There are MDBs, just like the African Development Bank, that are now led by women. Okay, so hopefully, Africa is ready, for leadership by women. Yeah. We've had the African Union led by a woman, Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, and she did a brilliant job, in there. So I think, hopefully as a continent, there's a recognition that women are central to Africa's development. We're not a sort of afterthought. And secondly, that women are fully capable of doing a great job in leading organizations. And I think in my case, because, for a part of the time that I spent at the African Development Bank, I was effectively also running the bank in the absence of the president. There should, really be no question about the ability of women to lead large organizations and be part of Africa's transformation.
Sure. And I ask this really intently at this time. I mean, we are talking about progress in some parts of the world, perhaps here on the continent, but we're also talking about a regression of that progress in others. And if we look at what has happened with the New Dawn right now that's unfolding in the US right now, we have seen a dialing back of investments when it does come to areas that are focused on diversity, inclusion and gender. We have also seen other countries in Europe also talking about a regression in financing towards women-led initiatives, most notably the United Nations Women. And I just would like to understand, in your point of view, your approach to diversity, equity and inclusion at this time where other parties are saying that there are more important issues that deserve attention.
So in my view, I honestly, Africa women make up 50% of the population. Youth are going to make up an even bigger proportion of the population in Africa. You can call these diversity, inclusion, but then I don't know, what it would mean for Africa to develop without a focus on those areas. So for me, maybe for the rest of the world, this makes sense to them in some way, but for Africa, it certainly makes absolutely no sense if we really want to pull ourselves from where we are today. So I would continue to argue that the African Development Bank needs to be focused on these areas and make sure that its interventions lift everyone without exception.
Sure. Absolutely. Time runs out when you're having fun, they say, right? We're running out of time. We've got a million things we need to talk about. We need to talk about Washington. You were in Washington.
Yes, I was.
And everybody was in Washington, campaigning and sending their message across. I just wanted your sense of what you saw in Washington in respect to your candidacy. And then we talk a little bit about where you're finding support within the continent and, of course, amongst the non-regional shareholders.
Yeah. So there were two objectives really for the campaign. And we went as a delegate of the Minister of Finance, Minister Kotongwane, who's one of the sponsors of the campaign, along with Mr. Lamula, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course the President of South Africa. So, but also, I mean, it's been amazing because I've met a lot of ministers as well who know about the campaign and in their own little ways are supporting the campaign. So really, this is an all of South Africa effort, and I am supremely grateful, for that support. So the objective in Washington, D.C. was really to engage with as many of the, regional and non-regional member countries. So we met with, practically for the entire week, right up until Saturday. Yeah. We left on Sunday. We had meetings, with shareholders. The bank has 81 shareholders, so you can imagine that it's a large number of countries that we need to cover. So we wanted to take the opportunity to reconnect. Some of them were meeting them for the third time, because they have different processes, for instance, in evaluating candidates than other countries who will consider other issues. And then, of course, there was the Brookings Institute event that took place with all of the candidates, and it was an opportunity for all of us to talk about what we stand for, why we are the right people to lead the bank. Each of us made our pitch, and also what the strategy for the continent is.
Absolutely. And in assessing your candidacy, I mean, obviously, you're not going to tell us who was backing you and where you didn't quite get the support that you'd like. I just want to get your sense of the overall strength of your candidates. Where would you place yourself?
I mean, I think that I am competitive. This is an honest assessment because I have it wouldn't help me at all, to have, woordklappers, is that what they call them, over these issues. So I think that the campaign has gone well. We've had tremendous support. As you know, President Ramaphosa appointed Ayanda Dlodlo as the special envoy, and she's very, very brilliant politician on the one side, but also having worked at the World Bank, she also understands the development bank institution. So she's been a tremendous partner for me. In this campaign, and I think things have gone well.
Absolutely, but your campaign is complicated, of course, by the politics to an extent, I don't know, you tell me, between South Africa and the US. This is obviously from a public perception point of view. In navigating and in looking for the support, how have you navigated that issue? So
I have a very simple, response to that question, which has come up, many times, and it's that I am running to lead an African institution, not a South African institution. So the engagement is on the basis of what I will bring to the African Development Bank, the leadership of the African Development Bank, and how that can interface with the United States. Because obviously I'm not running to run, to run a South African institution. This is an institution with 81 member countries, and as far as I'm concerned, the president of the bank has a responsibility to all of those 81 member countries.
Sure. I think maybe just shifting focus then to the regional shareholders, whom we sort of have had a sense of how they are feeling based on the sentiments of the other candidates that we've had the opportunity to speak with at CNBC Africa, the candidate from Zambia, from Senegal, as well as Mauritania, and Chad, all of whom are quite confident as you are in terms of the support from the region. Maybe you can just speak to your confidence levels from the region and just the kind of canvassing that you have been doing here on the continent.
I saw you in Kenya, Nairobi.
Yeah, so this is not an assessment made, it's not a desktop assessment. We've actually engaged with these countries. Many of them, we've been to Cote d'Ivoire, we've been to Ghana, we've been to Kenya, we've been to Uganda, Mozambique. We've also been to non-regional countries like Japan, for instance, and Germany. Recently we're in Germany. We've met with the Canadians, we've met with the US. So we've met with with a range of countries, but also you must remember that to become a candidate, and to be approved as a candidate of the bank, you needed to be seconded by other regional member countries.
Yes.
And my candidacy was seconded by Algeria, by the Democratic Republic of Congo, and by South Sudan.
Sure.
So, that matters, also. I'll let you do your homework about who seconded the others, and you make your assessment about, how confident, I have the right to be.
Absolutely.
In terms of...
The other side to that question, of course, is, the start of the process from a Southern African perspective, where we saw the Southern African Development Community endorsing or issuing a statement suggesting that they were backing the Zambian candidates. And I'm remembering my politics from my time covering the continent, where when a region speaks, it speaks for the whole region.
Yeah.
And South Africa is a part of SADC, but there was that division. Is that in any way hindering you?
No, I'm a candidate of the African Development Bank presidency. And if this was an issue, I wouldn't be, So, because I think people forget that while, regional endorsements, can help the campaign, in the end, you have 81 member countries, each of which will vote their shareholding. Yeah. So, so I think, I consider those issues to have been, issues that were maybe topical, before, today, perhaps. But I think post the decision by the bank in January, at the end of January, to finalize the candidates, so they've met all of the requirements. I think that's, as far as I'm concerned, an issue that was a little bit overblown, because regional economic communities don't vote.
If we just go back to the core of your strategy, your Lift Africa strategy, which from my understanding, you have spoken about infrastructure being quite central to there. And we do know that the infrastructure funding requirements of the continent continue to expand, while the pool of capital is not expanding to pace. What is your strategy then to try and make further headways in plugging the gap? What will you do differently that is presently not being done right now?
So I think that, I bring certain attributes, to this challenge. You're right, $100 billion, it's almost consistent, maybe even increasing if you include climate requirements beyond that. So the trick there is that, the bank as a AAA rated shareholders has the opportunity to use its capital to crowd in the private sector. So instead of trying to fund everything ourselves, which, obviously, AfDB has a lot of money, $315 billion in capital. It's nowhere near enough. I mean, a third of that would be for 1 year, the requirements of the continent. So we've got to do this in partnership, not only in partnership with countries, by the way, who have, significant budgets themselves for infrastructure, but also with institutional investors, with commercial banks, and with development institutions. People don't realize that the continent has over 100 development finance institutions of varying shape. And imagine if you could coordinate all of that firepower. It's significant. It's significant. So that's the first aspect of it. It's like bring everybody to work in partnership for the same goal. And I think everybody agrees that if you don't address the infrastructure issue, dreams of creating jobs for our young people are just that, dreams. Okay. Then the second aspect of it is that we've got to approach, the financing or the structuring of these financing solutions differently. I mean, as an example, when I was, CFO at the African Development Bank, I introduced hybrid capital as an instrument that could be used by development institutions to get funds from institutional investors. And the trick about this was that instead of these short-term funds like bonds that have to be paid back after a certain period, we were looking for, capital that would better mimic the long-term requirements for investments. Exactly, pension fund money, and in an instrument that basically would be treated as equity, because that's what Africa needs. For long-term development, you need that long-term money. So we were relying solely on the 81 member countries to provide that equity. So this was an important development that I introduced at the African Development Bank, to say that let's target institutional investors with an instrument that can be treated as equity, which would allow us to tap into that. And you must remember that when I talk about collaboration and working with institutional investors, they are not necessarily interested in signing one agreement, for this road and one agreement for this rail. They want instruments, that are easy to understand, easy to account for, and also easy to trade. So this is exactly, I think, where I can bring that kind of innovation, given my background, and I've already proven it. The African Development Bank has issued hybrid capital. Every other MDB is looking at issuing hybrid capital, and it was interesting at the Brookings Institute. All of my competitors were talking about, issuing hybrid capital, in massive amounts in order to be able to fund African development.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to seeing you and all those candidates at the meetings of the African Development Bank, which are, of course, going to take place in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. May 29 is the day when Africa is going to be looking at what the Roman Catholics are trying to do now, waiting for the white smoke to come up and not see too many black smokes coming out of the chimney. Ma'am, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.